Good morning. Today is February 3rd, 2020. My name is Lene Palmisano, and I chair this committee. This is the regular committee of this is our regular audit committee, and this is an independent committee of council. There's some new faces up here that I'm looking forward to explain as we go through our agenda here, and just a lot of other details to take care of today. So with me here at the dais are Commissioner Musich, Ms. Johnston, Mr. Fisher, Councilmember Warsame, and Councilmember Schrader. We are a quorum of this committee, and we're authorized to do the audit committee's business. First, colleagues, I'll move to adopt the agenda. The agenda that's before you, I may take it in a different order just for sake of clarity. For example, I think I'm going to do the report of the internal auditor before the sexual assault examination kits audit, because it will help explain how we embarked on this together with the police department. But the agenda formally is before you. Can I move this agenda? Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. The second is to accept the minutes of our last formal meeting. Our last formal meeting was October 21st of 2019. I will move that forward. Can I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nay. Those meeting minutes are adopted. I will also note that there's a report online that is a recorded informal meeting from January 13th of this year. There were no formal actions taken because we did not have quorum, but there were presentations given on several of these items, and some of the things before you in the 2019 plan were discussed at length. Let's see, first our announcements, and I wanted to introduce the new members of our audit committee and just explain how we all got up here. First is that every 2 years there is an opportunity for reshuffling audit committee members. That did not happen on the city council side. President Bender continues to appoint myself as chair and Jeremy Schrader and Abdi Warsame as my other council member colleagues on this board. We also have our city council appointed new member, Heather Johnston, who comes to us, at one point in time, she was the head of our budget department at the city. She also has been the city manager of Burnsville, Minnesota, and she just comes with a wealth of experience. She ends up replacing Mr. Scott Neal, city manager of Edina, who termed off he could not sign up for another term for audit committee. We continue to have Mr. Fisher from the University of Minnesota Law School and many other community-focused ventures in our city as the mayor's appointment, and we have Commissioner Stephanie Musich as our park board appointee. So that's terrific. Also, Mr. Fisher has offered to be the vice chair of this committee. That means should I be absent during an audit committee meeting, you would be helping to handle the proceedings. You'll have the clerk here to assist you. I don't anticipate that happening, but thank you for all of your advice and for the check-ins that we have informally. Next, unfinished business. We do have the performance evaluation of Ginger Bigby, who, if you have seen the January 13th note, it has needed to transition her life and actually is the new auditor for the city of Gainesville, Florida. But this is her performance evaluation from the previous year, and this is our summary of that conversation from the closed meeting held on October 21st, 2019. That letter is before you. I will move that motion forward. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. The next item is new business, and that's to appoint our interim director of internal audit. I am looking to approve the appointment of Mr. Ryan Patrick as our interim director of audit effective February 3rd. That's today. I know I've said this before, I've sent this out in information. Mr. Patrick has worked for the city of Minneapolis for over 9+ years. He has been working in the Civil Rights Department. He is an active member in civil rights, person in civil rights who has done a lot with our Office of Police Conduct Review, our Police Oversight Commission, and he also has, from time to time, really worked closely with our audit team to assist in many different ways. I am most comfortable with Mr. Patrick's appointment during this interim time. We are conducting a search for a new auditor, and I am so pleased and grateful that Mr. Patrick's offered to take on these responsibilities in the interim. So I will move that appointment of interim director forward. May I have a second? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That item carries. This next item, item number 6 in new business, I'd like to take this action all together unless members wish to pull it apart. These are all of the pieces and parts that we went into great detail on in January 13th in our informal conversation. So those items are receiving and filing the automated license plate reader audit report, publishing that report, receiving and filing the body-worn camera biennial audit report. This is the one that goes to the state, not our own that we do internally, and directing staff to publish that report, receiving and filing the contract amendments audit report and publishing that, referring to City Council recommendation to transmit the automated license plate reader audit report to the appropriate agency within the state of Minnesota, and referring to City Council recommendation to transmit the body-worn camera audit that goes to the state to the appropriate agency there. Do any of my colleagues wish to take this next motion apart? Thank you. I really appreciate your reviewing it online and helping us to dispense with this business that has been completed for quite some time. And I'd like to focus the majority of our work today on the things that are kind of coming here forward. So I will move this. May I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That item carries. Next, I'm going to go out of order for these last two, and I'm going to ask for the report of our internal auditor that will help us to appropriately, I think, set up our special project with the Minneapolis Police Department on the sexual assault kits. Welcome, Mr. Patrick and team.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano, Vice Chair Fisher, committee members. My name's Ryan Patrick again, and as of several minutes ago, I'm serving as the city's interim internal auditor. I'm going to provide the brief auditor update. I know there was an auditor update provided in January, but I wanted to kind of reintroduce some of the items on there and again, preview the special project that we'll be talking about later in the meeting. So with that, I'm going to launch into the presentation. So today I'm going to talk about the special project, just preview that. We'll be talking about it in detail a bit later. Talk a bit about the audit work in progress. And note that the appendix has the complete audit plan, the projects we intend to work on within the next year. I'll talk about our continuous monitoring efforts, prior audit issue follow-up, and if you look at the appendix, you'll see that rolling audit plan. So first, the special project related to the MPD sexual assault evidence kits. So this was a known issue back in the summer, and I'll talk specifically about how we got here during that presentation, but it was a known issue back in the summer, and internal audit was asked to consult with MPD on this project, specifically verifying the count of untested sexual assault evidence kits, reviewing internal controls around kit handling, and reviewing the plan to test backlog kits for potential efficiencies. So this kind of comes a bit out of order because we're talking about approving the special consult at the same time as we'll be doing the presentation. But as was noted, this was an item that was discussed back in October, November, and those meetings. So we've been conducting the work while at the same time knowing that we'd be talking about approving this special project during this meeting.
If I might just jump in here, I also want to share that it was shortly after the last audit committee meeting that there was the information that, was shared with the public around the sexual assault kits, and that started off a lot of kind of media back and forth about how this came to be and everything. And I really need to give credit to the MPD here in reaching out to the MPD saying, would this be potentially something that audit can help you with? Because Deputy Chief Force, who's, thank you, I should have introduced you at the beginning, is here with us today. Deputy Chief Force was really looking at many different ways to go forward from here in terms of how to do some different types of tracking around kit handling, and in examining those options, along with all of the things that his department currently does. I did suggest maybe it would be an opportunity to partner with our internal audit team to have them come in and also just to verify the amount of the kits, because there was some difference of opinion being bantered back and forth. And without my going and making that connection, as I often do with some of our different audits, both the internal auditor and Deputy Chief Force together decided to get together and have that conversation and embarked on this shortly after those press conferences about the sexual assault kit audits. So that's how this came to be. It was a really organic, kind of mature way for audits in our city to come about. And we do need to formally put it on our plan because it happened after our last formal meeting, but we are also receiving that special project information today. Thanks. I didn't want to interrupt, but I did just want to
Thank you for that
more personal background. Yeah.
clarification, Chair Palmisano. So I'll talk next about our audit work in progress. While we were working on this project, we have a variety of other ones going on, and I just wanted, instead of going through the projects in detail, because we'll focus on the special project, just note for the new members and the committee what projects we're currently working on alongside that special project. So first, we're working on our annual enterprise risk assessment. We've completed our city leadership risk assessment. So we've met with all city leadership, discussed what potential risks those departments were facing, and we're in the process of prioritizing what projects we may want to add to the audit plan throughout the next year. So we intend to propose the audit plan with updates based on those conversations and our own work in the next couple of months to be presented at the next audit committee meeting. So you'll have a full discussion of the updated plan in April. We're currently working on a CPED grant management audit. So this is already in progress with the objective, we're assessing the control environment for managing grants at CPED. We have a construction contracts audit, and we're in phase 2 as well, to review a sample of city construction contracts, changes, amendments, ensuring that controls are adequate and effective to appropriately manage construction contracts. We're working on a procurement system post-implementation workflow and user access management IT audit. I know that's quite a mouthful, but in this, we're reviewing the design and effectiveness of controls around the procurement system, new one that is in place. We're working with the Park Board on a grant management audit, reviewing grant administration processes and related controls, ensuring compliance and fraud risks are sufficiently mitigated. We also, along with projects, do continuous monitoring. So in areas where...
Wait, if I may, are there any questions or comments? No. Okay, thanks.
And please feel free to ask questions throughout. So we're also doing continuous monitoring alongside the normal work. So in areas where we see potential risk and needed follow-up, it may not be an ongoing audit, but we are monitoring the activities. So in finance, we're working with finance internal controls to provide regular status updates as they're testing their new internal control system. We're working with the city clerk and monitoring their progress to present the state of data to the audit committee in April. And we're working with neighborhood and community relations to improve their financial policies, requirements, and oversight of neighborhood spending of city reimbursed funds. So we attended the Community Connections Conference on Saturday and had a great conversation with various groups to talk about financial handling policies, and we're working with NCR to kind of continue that conversation and improve those controls moving forward. Prior audit issue follow-ups. So we continue to meet with departments and auditees to follow up on any recommendations or audit issues that they agreed to amend. So making sure that they're following through with the management action plans. So currently we have 21 open audit issues. We reopened one audit issue. We have 5 that are overdue right now, and we're meeting regularly with those departments to address those to make sure that they're handled in a timely fashion. We just had meetings last week to do so. We have 11 instances where we're validating management's response to their action plan, and closed 8 audit issues over the period of the last few months. And at the end of March, so coming up before the next audit committee meeting, we'll have 5 issues due. So they will hopefully be resolved before their due date, and we can present that update at the next audit committee meeting.
Mr. Patrick, the audit issue validations in progress, there's 11 of them. Is that number also in the open audit issues?
Yeah. So yes, Chair Palmisano, the open audit issues includes those 11. So as we validate management's response, we can close those and they may come out of the 21.
Thank you. For my colleagues, this is a kind of a nice dashboard that we thought it was important to keep in front of us. Mr. Fisher has really helped us come up with what are really the key things that we want to be looking at here. And I find it to be really helpful. It also really shows the continuous work of audit committee and taking care of old reports as we also embark on new ones. So.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't want a report to come out and then not follow up on the issues. We want to make sure those issues are resolved. And if you look at the prior audit issue update from the January meeting that was held, you can see some of those in more detail.
We have a question or comment from Ms. Johnston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. The issues, there could be multiple issues in one audit report. Do these are reflective of a number of different, do you have a sense of how many reports it is versus issues?
Yeah, Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Johnston. This includes all of the issues noted in reports. So of the 21, they may be from multiple reports. The prior open audit issue update that was issued in January actually notes each of the specific ones. I didn't want to have that conversation since not much has changed since then, but you can find in that auditor update each of the audit issues, the relevant department, and the report that it came from. So again, thanks to my audit team, I had the benefit of working alongside Ginger Bigby for the past week. It was very helpful. I've got big shoes to fill for the interim, but she was extremely helpful in helping me transition into this role. And I'd also like to thank the staff. They're doing a lot of great work day in, day out. They've welcomed me and certainly helped me understand the extremely complex issues that audit's dealing with. So again, I want to thank that staff, recognize that they've been working really hard to close issues and on the special reports over the last month.
And just to briefly introduce them, because we do have some new members of audit committee, I will start with the person in absentia. We have Huguette Esolat. She works out of Kansas City now. She used to work out of this building, but her family moved. She is our internal auditor manager. We also have representation from one of our partners that we use quite a bit. That's Baker Tilly. Right behind her, I think Stephanie. I'm sorry, Samantha is here. We have then Travis Com as our auditor right here on the corner, and we have Kamlin Alede also on the audit team. So
Often, Huguette does come into town for our audit committee meetings, but this was a special meeting and that didn't seem practical, so. Did you want to go in? Would it make sense to briefly walk through the audit plan?
I can certainly briefly walk through the appendix. So I've obviously been in this role for a short period of time, and that time has been primarily focused on the special project that we've been working on, making sure I'm immersed in that and understand it. So I don't want to explain in too much detail the projects that are ongoing. I'm going to be learning about those in the coming weeks as we close the special project. But you'll note the ongoing audit plan is ambitious. So you can see it spans several pages in the report, but we have the projects that I already mentioned were in planning and fieldwork phases. So we are in the midst of working on several projects that I talked about earlier in the auditor update. You'll see on this subsequent page the audits that have not been started. So these were added to the audit plan, many of them to be started in Q2. So we'll be finishing up our Q1 audits over the next month and beginning the Q2 audits, affordable housing, a follow-up to a prior project that related to equity in hiring for the Minneapolis Police Department that looked at the first phase from application through hire. The follow-up would look at hire through separation, so looking at equity throughout the entire process of a police officer's employment with the city. We note that we have IT governance and cybersecurity risk management audit, so this is an important field considering all the risks that we have from a cybersecurity perspective. Any city has those same risks, so we want to make sure on an annual or biannual basis that we're working with IT to ensure our cybersecurity controls are in place and functioning effectively. Revenue and collections, we're going to review revenue and collections processes. So that's a significant task. Obviously, the city takes in a fair amount of money on a day-to-day basis. So looking at controls in place in various departments for handling money. Water network integration consultation, security incident event monitoring, the GIS or Geographic Information System governance and controls, and Park Board patron safety and aquatics. Those are projects to be coming up probably in the upcoming quarters. So we'll be working on those. There's some more detail, and as we work on the annual risk assessment plan, we'll also be talking about those in more detail and providing updates to the committee. And then the final page, you'll see 2019 completed audits. So it's a list of the projects that we worked on in 2019. Consider completed. Because the audits are completed doesn't mean that we're not still following up on issues and making sure that everything within those audits is addressed by management.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. This has been helpful. With that, I will move to receive and file this report about our internal audit department's work in progress. May I have a second? Second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. This already is posted. As soon as those slides are done after agenda setting, those slides get posted typically to the external website, LIMS. Next, we are going to our MPD sexual assault examination kits, internal control review, and our untested kit count verification special project. I will invite again Mr. Patrick to come and introduce this. This is a little bit different in that we for regular standing meetings and audit reports that come out, we do send out a few days in advance for our committee members to review and come up with questions or thoughts or concerns that we have about an audit. We typically, that is the common practice. This particular audit, we felt we were trying to balance being able to have it out in public as soon as it was ready, with the fact that still on Friday afternoon there were details being wrapped up. So I understand you couldn't send it out on Friday afternoon, but it is not a full-blown audit. It is a special project, and thus I think this is something we can feasibly walk through and get through today. And I ask for the attention of my colleagues to be able to walk through and handle this so that the public might see it. The actions of these audits are to receive and file, but also to make these
public. So the public doesn't actually get to see this document before us until after we are done with it, if we approve and make it public. So that's the process. Mr. Patrick.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano, Vice Chair Fisher, committee members. We'll be talking about our work on the sexual assault evidence kits. This is a special project. It's a consult with the department, so it differs from a normal audit that you might receive. We work with the department to assess issues. It doesn't necessarily require formal management responses and plans, but there are follow-up issues. So this will likely not be the last presentation or opportunity for questions on the issue as we continue to follow up and make sure the work continues to progress.
And if you could, would you introduce the people here on behalf of MPD?
Absolutely. We have Deputy Chief Fors, who helped from the management level work with internal audit. We have Commander Giovalese. We have Lieutenant Darcy Horn and Christina Warren from Hennepin County. And this was a great collaboration. I'd like to thank upfront how transparent and effective MPD was and responsive in working with internal audit. This was a significant amount of work that happened in a short period of time. They certainly wanted to address issues and were willing to work with us all throughout the process to make sure we had enough evidence and adequate understanding of the process to give them relevant, credible feedback. And I'll note they're here. They're certainly experts on the subject, so I may defer questions to them when necessary. But thank you again for your work on this, and it's been a pleasure working with you.
Thank you. Welcome to Hennepin County. And I also will note that Mary Zenzen is in the back from the Records Information Unit of MPD as well. Thanks.
This issue touches on a lot of departments in MPD, and I'm thankful that they're here to represent. So I'll talk a bit about how we came to this issue first. And in 2015, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, the state-level investigative agency, in response to reports related to untested sexual assault kits, conducted a statewide survey of kits, untested kits specifically. So in 2015, MPD reported it had 194 untested kits in inventory. 194. In the summer of 2019, MPD, on its own initiative, found the number of untested kits to be greater than 1,700. So a significant difference between 2015 and 2019. At that point, because of that difference, the MPD and the mayor requested internal audit, consult with MPD to look at this issue, and I'll talk about the specifics of what we looked at in the next slide. So the scope of our work on this project was to first do a physical inventory count of all kits in MPD and BCA possession. So kits, I'll just use the word kits, they refer to sexual assault evidence kits, but we were going to verify that 1,700-ish number. Given there was that large change, we wanted to make sure that that count was accurate. We reviewed current policies and procedures for kit handling. So there are two similar bullet points, this and the next one. This is referring specifically to how kits are collected after they're created by a medical provider, versus the next bullet point where we're reviewing the process and policies for handling kits in the backlog. So the kits that we have versus kits that are created in the future and received by MPD. And finally, we reviewed the plan to test the kit backlog. So kind of each component related to this backlog, we did some level of assessment. I'm going to discuss each of these in turn. I'll note observations that we made during that process and recommendations that we have for remediating any issues that we saw in each of these bullet points. So first, I'll talk about the inventory count. So MPD's 1,700-ish number count, and you'll find the exact numbers in the report, differs slightly from internal audit's count, about 75 kits in difference from what we found to what MPD found. So the 1,700 plus number that MPD found was accurate. As that kit count increased from 2015 to 2019, we wanted to make sure that that was the total universe of kits that were collected, and we can state that they have an accurate count of kits. So this number of kits includes kits that MPD cannot test. That's an important distinction to make, that some kits are restricted, and that means the person may have gone to get a kit created, but decided to not report that kit to the police department. MPD may still collect the kit as evidence, but they cannot submit it to the BCA for testing. So these kits are restricted, meaning that within that 1,700 kit count, there are a number of kits that can't be submitted for testing. It also includes kits that were collected in circumstances that don't support testing. So a kit might be created in instances such as a homicide, where there might not necessarily be evidence of a sexual assault, but as part of the regular process, they would collect the kit, but it might not meet any criteria to submit to the BCA for testing. So this number also includes those type of kits. And there's significant research that's required for each kit to determine whether it's restricted or unrestricted, and whether it supports testing. If there's a confession and conviction obtained, perhaps you don't submit that case for testing. Next, I'll talk about the kit handling policies, specifically as kits are created, how MPD receives those kits. So first, our first observation was that MPD's policy related to kit handling needed updates. So first, there is strong institutional knowledge in the Bureau that investigates sexual assaults. They have a lot of working knowledge. They've been working in that field for a long time. So they have practices that they're following that are strong, but that isn't necessarily captured in policy. So if someone were to leave or there's turnover in the department, you might lose some of that strong institutional knowledge. Policies don't necessarily reflect all key roles in alignment with state statutes. State statutes actually create some very specific things that are required to be in policy, namely when a victim reaches out for data requests, the person who is assigned by MPD to respond to those requests should be identified in policy. And we have an information management system. So we had a legacy system, CAPERS as it was called, and now we've updated to a more modern system. The policy still might reflect information in the old system. It could be updated for the new. So our recommendation related to these observations would be to update with current systems and processes and capture that institutional knowledge so that if there is turnover, we haven't lost anything from those people who may be departing the unit, and reflect the current systems that MPD is using. Policy should be reviewed on a regular or annual basis as state law changes, systems change. Make sure that it's regularly reviewed so that it's up to date with current information. We have a great opportunity right now because we're developing a new property and evidence unit and a victim notification protocol. So these are two things that MPD is doing on its own initiative. And because of that, we'll likely need to update policy to reflect these new changes. So it's actually a good time to review the policy and make sure it captures all the new activities that MPD is conducting. So our second observation related to kit handling was that I'll walk through kind of the process first, and then I'll talk about the observation related to it. So first, someone may go to a medical provider to perform a sexual assault kit, to get that kit tested, to get that kit created, excuse me. So the medical provider would conduct the examination, create the kit, and then ideally notify MPD that the kit was created. MPD is required, after notification, to collect that kit within 10 days. MPD then, when a kit is eligible for testing, so unrestricted, would send that kit for testing within 60 days after they receive it notification. However, in our review of the process, we noticed that there was no central method for notifying MPD that a kit was created. Why is this important? Different institutions might have different practices for notifying MPD. They might have one point of contact, so they're reaching out to their person that they work with to notify them that a kit was created, or they may expect regular follow-ups from MPD inquire whether or not there were kits. So without this central system to notify MPD, it's not clear that MPD is being notified exactly at the same time as the kit is created. And also, if kits are immediately sent to the BCA from the medical provider, there may be a gap in notification between MPD, the BCA, and the medical institution.
Mr. Patrick, a question here. Because we're human, because we move around boundaries in a region, usually this is MPD's process. Is it true that also a clinic, a medical clinic or other provider, hospital, et cetera, has different ways that they have to notify other jurisdictions too, right? So for example, if this clinic happens to be in Golden Valley, what makes that, and a kit is created, is it about where the person who was tested lives, or rather is it about where an assault occurred, that it be within Minneapolis or not? And did you examine, and then did you find different processes and procedures based on what city?
Chair Palmisano, I'm going to defer to the experts on this. They may have worked more with other jurisdictions, so I'm going to let someone from MPD answer that specific question because I don't know the details on that.
Deputy Chief Force.
Chair Palmisano, committee members, thank you for having us here. With me is Lieutenant Darcy Horn from the Sex Crimes Unit, who has a lot of hands-on experience with these type of issues day to day. We will collect the kits for offenses that occur within the city of Minneapolis. Obviously, the lion's share of these come from some of the major medical providers, but people may choose to report a sexual assault at a clinic or other areas. And I think that's where there might be some difficulties or gaps, so to speak, because of the large variety of different medical stakeholders out there that we may have interface with. If you'd like to elaborate a bit on that, Lieutenant Horn.
Thank you. Good morning. Sometimes, depending on the case and where the incident occurred, an assault that occurred in Minneapolis will be investigated by the MPD. If a victim lives out of the city and chooses to get a SARS exam out of the city, and we will follow up with that medical facility and pick up that kit.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions on that subject?
Just one clarification.
Ms. Johnston.
Thank you. Just a quick clarification. With the new HIPAA laws, I guess they're not that new anymore, but I mean, do you require, that the victim give permission to have that kit transferred? Is that the piece that is also a factor?
As a part of the kit, there's an authorization where the victim gets to decide if he or she would like to report this crime to law enforcement. That gives us that ability to take that kit. Thank you.
So, and then per what Mr. Patrick was saying, that there were any number of ways, there wasn't really a centralized way that these many different stakeholders would necessarily use to reach MPD. I had heard just conversationally that, sometimes they would just call like the front desk of the precinct that they were used to working with, right? And whoever is there at that time may or may not try to send that out, dispatch that out to go and get a kit. They might be going and picking up a kit as they go about other business, a patrol or et cetera. Is that some of the concern that was vetted out here in the first part? Is this no central method for notifying MPD? I guess what I'm asking is the concern that it's not consistent in a way that even if a person they're used to working with happens to be on vacation, or is it that there's no central department that people were calling to go and pick up a kit, or what is the centralness of the method that was of concern?
I think most of our stakeholders are used to dealing with our property and evidence unit, particularly an individual who makes regular rounds to collect these kits from various locations. And they know that that's the point person, and that's the person that comes and collects the biological evidence or whatever additional evidence that they have at these locations. The disconnect then comes with other with some medical providers or clinics not having that regular connection with us, and then utilizing whatever sounds to them to be the best way of reaching out to us to connect with us. I think in these cases, when these cases are reviewed by us and we see that someone reported a sexual assault and that they underwent a sexual assault examination at a particular clinic, that is an immediate trip for us to know that there is a kit at one of these clinics. So that's one way that we can backstop that. But there's a large amount of different providers out there in different places, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves in different regards, but it's one of the many reasons why we as an organization and as a profession truly advocate a statewide kit tracking system that really brings all the stakeholders together in such a manner that's codified by legislature and law and really connects all the gaps across the system, because we may have a very good system that we put in place in Minneapolis, but for this type of a crime and victimization, we're dealing with so many different stakeholders outside of the city, and I think it would be best for all victims if that were the way to go. And we are proactively exploring that with our partners.
I understand that from earlier conversations with you. Are there any places that do statewide tracking systems that might be looked to as a model?
There's numerous ones that do. And we've just recently had some conversations with the BCA, who would likely be the people to help spearhead this. Many states do have this capacity, have instituted it in their state statutes. It's very, very effective. Everybody operates off the same playbook. It increases accountability statewide. There should be no reason why a survivor of sexual assault are undergoing different experiences in different jurisdictions. It should be the same across the board. One of the additional ways is it really alleviates some aspects of it, and the one that we would support the most. It would really alleviate this notifying of a department to come pick up a kit to bring it back to us for us to take it to the BCA. Under current statute, if a kit is unrestricted and unless there's some sort of specific prosecutorial exception to having it tested, it's going to be tested. There should be, it seems kind of extra to have the middle person of a kit being created in a clinic or a hospital, and then having a jurisdiction have to come pick it up and bring it back to our property, and then go from our property to the BCA. And the BCA understands this, and one of the possibilities that is being explored is direct shipment right to the BCA from the point of collection. I think that would help alleviate a lot of this as well as centralized storage of kits. So there's a lot of things out there. There's many different states that are doing this, and I know that at the state level and through our stakeholders, and especially with our very much supportive input, it's being looked at.
Thank you. And do you happen to remember off the top of your head a couple of states that you think are models of this central tracking? Isn't one of the Dakotas one of them?
Iowa, Michigan, Idaho.
I know you've looked at
Lieutenant Horn.
Iowa, Michigan, Idaho.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Patrick, if you want to go ahead and continue.
Thank you.
And you'll find some discussion of the idea of a statewide tracking model in the memo. I think in the interim, our recommendation was to create this centralized notification system for collection of kits. It might take some time to develop a statewide protocol, but in the interim, we could have a centralized tracking notification and tracking system, central phone number, email address, and that way if the person who's responsible for it may not be available or someone at the precinct desk receives information about it, they will know to contact this central source to make sure that the relevant people are getting notified, whoever that might be. So all notifications can be routed to a single number or email, and then MPD can work with IT data and analytics to improve tracking to make sure that we're complying with the 10-day and 60-day requirements. If we don't have a centralized number, if we don't have a centralized tracking system, we don't necessarily know our level of compliance with that. There is tracking that's going on. But as we improve consistency, we can also improve consistency in our data collection and making sure that we're hitting our targets. So the backlog tracking process, so that was talking about policies related to kits. Generally, this is talking specifically about policy, how the process by which we're looking at the backlog of kits. So our observation first is that each case requires a significant amount of research, like I mentioned previously. So staff research each case. You've got to look into the specific details behind the case to learn whether it's restricted, unrestricted, or there's like Deputy Chief Forrest mentioned, a prosecutorial reason to not submit the case for testing. So staff are reviewing each individual case of the 1,700, and then management reviews the staff classification in order to create a queue for testing of the backlog kits. So it's a significant amount of work for each kit that's in the backlog. And throughout this process, staff might identify incorrect information in the records management system, so they're doing a holistic review of the case.
Mr. Patrick, something that has been said a couple times and is in here, a prosecutorial reason not to submit for testing. Can you just give me some examples, just in kind of plain speak? Would it be if? Can you give me a for instance?
Sure. I actually have the expert here. Christina, would you mind? She's actually working on this very issue, so it might be better to hear it.
Thank you. Ms. Warren, thank you for coming in.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. What the auditor was speaking about was the exception that's in the current legislation that allows for a certain kit not to be tested as long as there's written sort of agreement with the county attorney's office. As part of our sexual assault initiative in the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, we have made very clear to both our partners with Minneapolis Police Department as well as all of our other partners within other agencies in Hennepin County that we cannot identify a single instance or example where we would not see the value in testing a kit. And so while it currently does exist on paper as an exception to the otherwise stated preference of having all kits tested, we have not been able to identify a situation or a reason why we wouldn't see every kit needs to be tested as the rule. And thankfully, Minneapolis Police Department shares in that. I have yet to be asked to agree not to submit a certain test or kit for testing.
Thank you. That's helpful.
So in our work observing this system in place, we had several recommendations. First was there's already a robust tracking mechanism that parties are using to track kits as they progress in their research on the backlog. There are some enhancements that could be made, specifically management sign-offs. When management reviews the work of staff and signs off that a kit is ready to go for testing, making sure that information's in the tracker. And of course, to add kits that were identified during internal audits review, add those kits to the tracking. Staff is likely using criteria to prioritize kits. So while all kits, like Ms. Warren mentioned, are to be tested, since there's a backlog, they're identifying kits to be prioritized to be sent immediately to the BCA. We recommended that they ensure that every staff member and every person reviewing the kits is using consistent criteria to prioritize kits, and then to make sure that there's a plan in place to update records in the police information management system as any inconsistencies or errors are found, as well as when research is done, making sure that information is added back into the information management system. And finally, the backlog testing process. So this is how kits are being tested and submitted to the BCA. So our observation was that there's a plan to test all eligible kits after review. MPD has already submitted 100 kits to the BCA for testing. So there is progress happening. They're already working on eliminating the backlog by sending kits to the BCA. But we noticed there is some confusion among stakeholders that while the kits were sent to the BCA, the kits may not have been returned by the BCA, and this has led to a delay in the backlog kits being tested. So our recommendation related to this was specifically have regular and continued communication between the parties, ensuring that the BCA understands MPD's expectation in when and how these kits are to be tested, that the BCA provide weekly updates to the MPD so they can continuously track the BCA's progress on testing backlog kits as they're being sent. An internal audit, as a part of this review, is going to add to its continuous monitoring plan regular reviews to make sure that kits are being returned and to be able to report back on results.
I'm not seeing any comments from my colleagues, so I'll just step in and say it. It sounds like a nice way of saying that the BCA isn't doing their job. Is the BCA doing their job? Are we trying to manage the BCA? It seems like we're sending things to the BCA and not getting them back and not getting the progress we expected.
As of our review last week, the BCA had not been returning backlog kits. I don't want to speak specifically to their work process, and I don't believe they're here to talk about it, but I can certainly ask any of my colleagues if they want to discuss how that communication's been going and the progress that the BCA has been making.
Ms. Johnston?
And the reason that the kits have to be, I mean, obviously once they're tested by the BCA, there is a report generated. And the reason the kits have to be transferred back is because the local jurisdiction is the one responsible for storage. Is that currently why? Okay. It just seems the back and forth. I mean, it's easy to get a report. I mean, not easy, but, just trying to make sure that I understand that. So it's the storage that's required. Thank you.
We actually don't we don't retain some of the evidence in the kit. The kit, without getting too much into the specifics, some of the kit is returned, but not the biological samples. The report is the key piece of evidence coming back with the BCA's findings when they do their biological testing. Deputy Chief Forrest can speak more clearly to that.
Deputy Chief.
Chair Palmisano, committee members, I can speak a little bit to put a little bit of clarity to the testing capacity of the BCA without speaking for them, and I would not want to do so. We have finalized our contract with this for the city of Minneapolis to pay for 2 additional analysts that are going to be focused solely on working on our backlog kits. And generously, the Hennepin County Attorney's Office also has formalized our contract with the BCA to fund and pay for 2 additional analysts, as well as costs for the testing materials to handle this backlog.
These two analysts are at the BCA to do the actual testing.
Altogether, it will be 4 analysts that will be assigned to work solely on our kit backlog. They do have to hire, train, and get these people online, so there is a lead-up period. As of today, I have been told, and I'm assuming it's completely accurate, that rather than wait and hire, they have moved 1 fully trained person in place now to begin working solely on our backlog kits. In my conversations with the BCA, we have sent over 100, nearly 160 kits to the BCA as part of our attempts to move forward and clear our backlog and get started on this. From the moment we recognized the size of the backlog, we wanted to begin to proactively send as many kits as we could to the BCA to get this process started. And I think that absent the additional analysts, they were having capacity issues in processing these on top of current kits that are going over there because we still send everything that we receive. So we're anticipating with this full-time employee now getting online immediately, and they're now receiving the contracts to hire and train people, that will pick up significantly in the future.
So if I could restate, I'm happy to take the blame here, DC4's. What you're saying is we've sent over 100 of these delayed kits to try and start to work to clear out the backlog, but because of the ability to get this additional capacity in place, we haven't actually gotten any back yet.
From that backlog, I believe 8. We've received results back from 8 of those that we have sent.
And when did we send those 100 kits?
It's been over a course of time. It wasn't one bulk submission. Lieutenant Horner, rather than yell across the room at you, I know we had worked out, we began to work out an arrangement with them as to how many additional kits they could accept on a weekly basis from us.
Right.
So we could beginning to delve into the backlog.
So 8 kits back seems like less than 1 a week, Lieutenant Horn.
We send approximately 20 a week. Ma'am.
But what we're saying, of the approximately 20 a week that you've sent, you've gotten back a total of 8.
That's correct.
In addition, just to say this is about handling a backlog. You're not talking about the regular course of handling of new assault kits coming in and that sort of thing, right?
I should clarify, ma'am, that the 20 a week may include current kits.
I see. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Patrick, sorry, I didn't mean to derail the conversation. I just really wanted to dive in and understand this part.
Thank you. So that addresses the 4 main components that internal audit reviewed during the special program review. I'll just wrap up again, discuss each issue in turn briefly. MPD accurately counted the kits. There was a small number of discrepancies, but the 1,700 plus number was accurate that MPD produced. MPD should review and update policies and procedures on perhaps an annual basis to make sure they reflect current systems. We should create a centralized system to contact MPD that'll allow for better tracking, making sure that we're hitting all the state required timelines until possibly we have a statewide system that will harmonize things across the entire state of Minnesota. We should track our kits, making sure that we're complying with the 10-day notification and 60-day sending requirement to the BCA. We should enhance the kit backlog tracker, minor things like adding a management approval and updating information in the information management system as we notice any errors or inconsistencies. The stakeholders, BCA, MTD, City of Minneapolis, should communicate regularly and work out any issues in testing the backlog to make sure that the kits continue to flow back to Minneapolis after they're sent to the BCA. And that part of that might be meeting regularly to discuss expectations, ensuring they're met, and developing a system to really clearly track and identify each kit in the backlog that's sent and when it's returned.
Sorry, I didn't see Councilmember Schrader's flag there, and then Mr. Fisher.
Thank you. Just numerous questions. First, could you do you have a timeline for when the backlog will be cleared?
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Schrader, I would defer to MPD on their timeline. I don't have the specific timeline. It wasn't provided to us necessarily they're doing a significant amount of research on each kit, but I'm not sure on the timeline, and they could probably better speak to that.
Okay.
Deputy Chief Force.
Chair Palmisano, committee members. Without getting too far in the weeds on that, I think it becomes about the capacity. And I believe that we've been told that a analyst can process about 30 to 35 kits a month. So times 4 should give you kind of a capacity of how many backlog kits. And then as we move forward, I think we anticipated somewhere around the 2-year mark to effectively get through the backlog in such a manner that the kits are being processed and returned, and then giving us the opportunity to examine the results that come back from the BCA and do any sort of investigative follow-up that needs to be done and or review with the county attorney.
Sure. And just to follow up on that, how far back do these kits go?
To the 1980s. We've retained kits goes back over 30 years. And to give a little bit of framework, there's multiple reasons why we have that number of kits, and that goes from, I would say the way that kit testing was reviewed and handled, what policies and procedures and kind of the thoughts were over the course of over 30 years. For many, many years, individual kits were looked at as just specific to that case. They weren't looked at for the kind of the holistic value, evidentiary-wise, of submitting these to the statewide convicted or comparing them against convicted offender data to see if there's patterns. It was looked upon as a piece of evidence in a specific case. And if the case or the reasons behind the case didn't warrant that particular piece of evidence being tested, people were reluctant to send it in because they felt they may be overloading the system or backlogging the BCA with things. There's many, that is not the thought that we have currently. We look at things very much differently, and we are of the opinion we want every possible kit that we can to be tested. And we looked at when state law changed and said from August of 2018 moving forward that all untested, unrestricted kits, if you could, should and will be tested. We wanted to apply that backwards as well and say that every kit that we have in our inventory should be subjected to the same rules and people should be getting the same answers. And that's the way we're moving forward with that.
And then my next question, I know a lot of this kind of comes from like the starting point in 2000, I think it was 15, when there was a lot more national attention. And it was said that you had a lot less at that time. Duluth was kind of hit the hardest, saying that they had the most untested kits. I believe also at the time there was federal funding for that.
Yes.
Is that funding still available?
We are still looking forward in our cooperation with the Hennepin County Attorney's Office at looking at our SACI grant funding. As you know, with things like that, the 2015 SACI grant funding, there's still kits that were awarded funding from the 2015 grant that they still have not yet done. We did not want to apply that level of delay to this. However, moving forward, we are seeking SACI grant funding, and we'll be looking at that to help, I would say, fund any kit testing that needs to be done beyond our contracts.
And so where's the funding coming for the two analysts from at least the city side of it?
I would have to get the clarification from our finance director on that, but I believe it may be coming from internal police funds.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And just a clarification on that, Deputy Chief. In mid-November, I think, when we first, heard about this and became public with this, we made the commitment at that point in time to fund these two additional analysts. Is that correct?
Yes.
Internally, somehow, within our city to clear it out. So then with the BCA, I would just say it's February to them, not you. Thank you.
Just to follow up on your points, I mean, my point is that this is terrible, and someone needs to say that. And I appreciate that the city did what it could when it knew that, but there's a lot more to this, and I appreciate the proactivity of the department, but it's a pretty bad mistake.
Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Deputy Chief Forrest, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
I'm going to back up a little bit because I'm confused of where this all came from in the first place. In 2015, there was an analysis done of the untested kits, and 194 were found and sent to the BCA. Now it's 1,700, and I'm still struggling to figure out 1,731, I think, is the accurate number, although I've just seen the report sitting here at the dais. What is the actual backlog? Does this include all kits, or does it include only kits that should be reported to the BCA because a crime has been committed and identified?
In 2015, the directive that came from the BCA was to provide them with an accounting of all the untested, unrestricted kits that you have in your inventory. As we've described before, unrestricted means that a survivor is reported that they were a victim of sexual assault. A kit was created and they signed, authorized a form saying this can be reported to the police and tested. Those were the number of those were the kits that we in our inventory that we were told to report to the BCA. The individual that performed this audit did not do an accurate job. And we have looked numerous times during the course of once we collectively realized that number was woefully inaccurate. And to Councilmember Schrader's point, at the time, there should have been a flag that we didn't have more untested kits than Duluth. We are the largest municipality in the state. We handle the largest number of sexual assaults in the state. And if we're doing our job as we should in retaining kits, we should have the largest number of untested kits in the state. Following, everyone was essentially applying the same methodology over the course of several decades. How that was not caught, I do not know. I don't have those answers for you. I know that we have been unable to find a definitive pattern, and we've basically chalked it up to, it was left to the work of one individual who may have applied their own methodology as to what they considered a testable kit to be. And that person no longer works for the city.
Thank you for that. Just a follow-up question, Madam Chair. When we talk about restricted, this is where I'm getting confused a bit. There are basically a number of circumstances where a kit may have not been tested at the time, given, as you described, the thought that it applies to a single case, not to a pattern or practice. So you could not test a kit because a crime has not been reported, even though a kit has been created, although I don't know why that would be. There may be a case where the victim has declined to testify, and therefore the case doesn't move forward. There are cases, I imagine, where the perpetrator has been identified and maybe pled guilty, or there's been a decline in prosecution for some reason at the county attorney's office. And maybe there are other circumstances as well. Are those what we're talking about, restricted?
A restricted kit, in the parlance of what we're discussing here, means that a survivor of sexual assault or a victim of sexual assault may go, and for a multitude of reasons, to include getting medical care, counseling, can go to a clinic, a hospital, and meet with a sexual assault nurse, get a sexual assault examination, again, like I said, get needed medical care, and not choose to report it to police. And that kit would be assigned essentially like a code, a random number, or something that can be connected to that person at a later time should they come forward and say, I want to report this incident to police. So it allows survivors the ability to have that evidence captured, but then it gives them the opportunity that if they, I would say, to make the choice of whether or not they want that incident reported to police. We have taken the choice of retaining these kits, and we want to be able to, that way, if a survivor comes forward at a later time, knowing that what we know now about the psychology of victimization and how people respond to trauma, we want to be able to have that evidence preserved and on hand should someone come forward at a later time and feel comfortable in their willingness to report that. Those kits, by law, we cannot test without the victim's consent. So it sounds simple that one's restricted and one's unrestricted, but we're talking about 30 years of varying ways of how those were recorded, categorized, labeled, referenced to in property, to a more simplistic and I'd say easy to understand way that we do things now, in that we pull one property number for all restricted kits. And now, so we know that if a kit is under that property number, that's a restricted kit, it's easy to recognize. However, 30 years ago, that wasn't the case. So you can start seeing that once we get into the fact that we have a kit, we have to look at the case number, we have to look at the case, we have to see what it's under, because what we don't want to do in our haste to want to work through this backlog is inadvertently overstep ourselves and test kits that are restricted, and we don't have the authorization to do so. So it does require a little bit of the farther back you go, to individually look at each case to make sure that this is labeled correctly, because, like I said, we're dealing with over 30 years of varying property room protocols and procedures.
Follow-up, Madam Chair. Thank you. Deputy Chief Forrest, so given that restricted piece, that's where the victim has not authorized the kit to move forward.
Yes.
We're talking about then, exclusive of those unrestricted, 1,731 kits that really should have been tested over the past 30 years.
Those are 1,700 kits that we have the ability to test, yes. And those are ones that it is our intention to have fully tested.
And among those then, there are some that haven't been tested because of prior practice not to test kits if the victim has declined to testify, even though a crime has been, he or she had originally authorized the test.
I think there's a variety of reasons. There's a wide variety. And as I said before, it's by no way reflective of what our philosophy is today.
Yes.
And how things, I think, are being viewed, and how law enforcement in general has viewed sexual assault kits and their value, and I would say our obligation to test this evidence when we do have it. Case in point, there may be instances where the victim was not responsive, just did not want to engage, said, I don't want anything done. There may have been instances in the sense that if the question was of consent and both parties acknowledged that contact did occur, there may have been a consideration that the kit would normally be tested to show proof of contact, but if both people are already stipulating that the contact occurred, they could have considered the kit not to be really of any evidentiary value to prove that particular point. We recognize that there's a lot more to this, that sometimes these kits may show patterns of behavior in other areas that we didn't know about. And so we see the overall general value of it. And we recognize that there's a capacity issue at the BCA currently with this. I think the fact that we are the largest jurisdiction, we've reported the largest backlog, and we're working through this, it's highlighting some of the shortcomings that they're seeing. And so I'm hopeful that through this process, it will help to, I would say, mold and create some of the best practices that can be used statewide to address these same problems so that they don't occur.
Thank you for that, Madam Chair. If I have one last question. In 2015, I understand there were 1,565 kits identified as a type backlog, and for various reasons, they weren't sent to the BCA because of the items you just discussed. Would that mean that 1,565 kits identified in 2015, that they just missed up to 1,700 kits?
And this is the number reported was around 200 reported in 2015, and we obviously have, and I guess my mistake, I wanted to thank the internal audit group for their work. They've been fantastic to work with. We came to them and said, please look at what we have. We felt we were accurate in what we were looking at, but as Councilmember Palmisano said, there were sometimes people who were utilizing the media to spread their opinion that for whatever reason we were manufacturing this number. In one instance I read, someone said it was for political gain. I honestly don't know how you could find that to be to political gain, but there was one of the reasons out there. We wanted to have the professionals that do this for a living look at what we have and to give us that backstop, that independent look. That was not done in 2015, and it should have been when this type of endeavor was put upon the department. I would like to have specific answers for you as to why those decisions were not made. I have not found them. I don't believe in passing the buck, but I don't know who made these decisions. But I will tell you this. It appears that these kits were never lost. That's kind of I think something that gets brought up, or at least in a bit of confusion about finding kits or lost kits. The kits were never lost. They were always been inventoried and stored in the same consistent way as when they came in. The misstep came when an individual was tasked with providing a reporting of these kits. And I went over and reviewed and looked at what the direction from the BCA was, and it was very specifically all untested, unrestricted kits. It did not put in caveats of only if a person wanted to cooperate or only this or only that. I suspect that the person tasked with this applied numerous methodologies or different filters to what they felt were viable, untested kits that should be sent to the BCA. I can't confirm that, but I can't find any other logical rationale behind it. I feel that the question was simple from the BCA. Tell us all your untested, unrestricted kits. As I said, there may be a lot of reasons why the kits were not sent, based upon how at least protocols and what was commonly done at the time, but that wasn't for us to filter. And if we would have done so accurately, as we should have in 2015, we wouldn't be having this conversation today.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the change in attitude as well.
Yes.
I commend you on that.
Thank you, sir.
Are there any other questions from my colleagues? Councilmember Schrader.
Sure, just not a question, but a comment. It would be really helpful due to kind of the changing history and kind of the changing kind of views on these untested kits to get kind of a number of, get some idea of how many of these weren't tested because of protocol previously and because of like different determinations, because it's helpful to know that what's getting into the BCA immediately is the things that are prioritized as needing for investigations.
Yes, Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Schrader. We've been in great partnership with the Hennepin County Attorney's Office as part of our initiative, and for those who aren't familiar, as part of an overhaul, so to speak, of sexual assault investigations. I'm going to take a little moment just to kind of give you a little background on this. We worked very hard recognizing that our policies and practices were not very victim-centered, and we've added staff to our sexual assault unit. We've brought in graciously an embedded attorney from the County Attorney's Office and an advocate from the Sexual Violence Center, who all sit together and review and do case assignment reviews and really have a lot of back and forth direct input right within the unit. This is pretty unusual and has not been done historically to allow that level of multi-disciplinary input. In order to address this backlog, we have hired or brought on an additional investigator who will solely be looking at backlog kit returns, and also additional support staff to handle the accounting and data collection of kit figures, so that way we can address many, if not all, of the recommendations as soon as possible that have been brought forward by the audit committee. But we have really taken a victim-centered approach to this, and we are looking at how can we best serve people and the victims when we're approaching things. So again, I just want to say thank you to the audit committee for what they've done. They've brought forward a lot of excellent recommendations. They've strengthened, I believe, a lot of the feelings that we've had that looking at this as to where we need to go with this, and we feel confident that we're moving in the right direction with it.
And I'll just clarify that, Deputy Chief Wars, it's not on us that you're saying thank you to, it's on the work of our audit department.
Yes.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Patrick, is this conclude your presentation of the document before us?
Yep. This is charting, noting what we perceived as high needs, high risk categories for addressing and moderate risks. I'd also like to thank the work of our audit staff. I'm just coming on board, and Travis, Cam, and Comlin put in a ton of work on this in a very abbreviated timeline. They respected just how important this work was to get right, and they worked very hard to complete that. So I'm truly thankful for their hard work on that and the partnership with our auditees or our partners on this consult.
Great. I will also note, I didn't mention this in the how this audit came about work, but the mayor's office has also been heavily involved here. And the mayor's office also was in conversation with me as we were coming up with solutions in mid-November or early November as we were realizing this would come forward. So I didn't want to forget him in this round of gratitude, I guess. I'm going to put forward the motions that you see under item number 7, which is to approve this review and count verification special project, to receive and file it, and to direct staff to publish this report. Second? Seconded by Ms. Johnston. Any other thoughts or questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in approval, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That item carries. With that, our business in front of this committee is completed, and so we will adjourn. Thank you.